The St. John's International Women's Film Festival was the site of possibility for so many emerging or aspiring or even dreaming young women filmmakers. This was about work and about building a community of women, both women in the audience, but also women creators.
It's really interesting that one of the longest running women's film festivals isn't in Paris or Toronto or like this big metropolitan center. Instead, it's this little island in the middle of the North Atlantic.
Newfoundland had a very strong matriarchal structure that has existed here, has been strong for a long time. And 30 years ago, the Women's Film Festival came about. And I think when we look around and see our producers, our directors, our writers, and there's so many that are women, it is definitely related to that.
In order to get your film in the festival, you had to have a female writer, producer, or director. So more people just wanted to have a woman involved so that they could get their film to play here. And that seems like a sort of a strange thing, but it's the place where the work is most celebrated locally. And so if you are making something and it's excluded from that, you're really missing out on an opportunity for everybody in your community to celebrate it. So you kind of had to loop a woman in one of those major roles, which I think was really great. And that's why I feel like the festival is really, really connected to how we have formed as an industry.
One does use words like energy, certainly community, to talk about something in the air or something in the water. I had one of those educations that many people do when they come here, if they get it quickly, that there is something special here. There's an immediacy to people's relations to each other. People wanted to be part of that community. In the mid-'80s, the birth of the St. John's International Women's Film Festival corresponded with the arrival of Henry Morgentaler on the scene. I did a pro-choice commentary. How is it that we would have to live like that? That there was no access. Henry Morgentaler knew that, though. They had heard me on this commentary. They knew I was kind of mouthy about stuff. I was asked quite directly if I would do the communications and all the media, handle all that. And I said, yep, didn't hesitate. I just learned about so much of what was going on in this community from women who I met in those moments. They were absolutely fearless.
When we met across the table with Kinsella and we asked him just what priority women's issues were, he told us that we were doing good work. Then he turns around and slaps us in the face and says, oh, but I'm sorry, we're not going to give you any operational funding.
I kind of recognized the weight of all of this and the importance of being part of it and having the opportunity to do something for women and in this community. There is a line of continuity that leads to the formation of a film festival dedicated to women and to women creators because of the importance of providing space for women to be making stuff, and not just making it, but having a venue where they could exhibit it. I think in the early days of the festival, the board existed in this modest form, and there were some films being made for the film board by women. The very first set of screenings we had were by Donna Reed on the subject of witches. When we advertised a free screening and walked over to the LSPU hall and saw this huge lineup, largely women, many of them wearing witches' hats and black capes. I was like, whoa, something is happening here. Let's see if we can do this again, same time next year. mid-'80s in Newfoundland. There was an appetite for expanding the arts community itself. Theater community had kind of blossomed.
I see. This art has what you call an intrinsic insular inner value.
This is the home of NIFCO, the Newfoundland Independent Filmmakers Cooperative.
The film community was centered really at NIFCO.
So let's go inside and see if we can meet some of the filmmakers.
A wider or deeper consciousness about women in the industry, slowly becoming aware of how underrepresented women were.
30 years ago, there were very few women in film. Kathleen Shannon, who was the executive director of Studio D, which was the first publicly funded feminist filmmaking studio, and it was at the National Film Board, came to launch a film about pornography. I talked to her about what was happening in our community and what I was seeing through working at the Women's Center and the stories that I was hearing. And I said to Kathleen, Kathleen, we need to, women in Newfoundland and Labrador, we need to be telling some of those stories.
We came to the understanding that inclusion is actually an action word. You have to go out and invite people to become part of your industry. And oftentimes, women were not being invited to the table, or were feeling that if they tried to come to the table, they weren't going to be accepted.
The growing of the film festival happened very, very slowly over the first 8 or 9 years, watching what people were making here, learning about NIFCO, starting to understand the funding nightmare that is the Canadian film industry, all the leveraging that had to go on, becoming acquainted with Telefilm and Producers Association. It gave me such a better understanding, not just of what was on screen, but what got that film to that screen.
To not have women's stories, not just stories about women, but stories created by women, stories directed by women. It's like going through life with one hand over your eyes and just missing the whole visual field.
The early days was mostly about showing whatever we could to an audience, largely at the time of women.
A lot of the films that would reach out to women and say, you're not alone, because our experience was so different. And there was nothing that reflected our reality back to us. Because our films weren't getting in film festivals or on TV, because they were seen as one-sided and not objective. If you're not subjective, if you're not passionate about it, why would you even want to do it? And I was so proudly not objective about the films that we were making.
As a first-time filmmaker, you come in and you feel important and you feel a part of this community, just like anyone who's done several features. And I think that's an incredible mandate to have as a festival.
Short films, first-time filmmakers having the joy of sharing that experience in such an appreciative way with an audience, like standing up there naked, showing your stuff, and then everybody loves you naked.
I know I wouldn't have felt like I could make a movie without the specific experience I had here with the Women's Film Festival. You have the access to everyone here, access to all these filmmakers and people working in the industry.
When I was in university, I attended the Women's Film Festival for the first time. A short film opened up a documentary by Anita McGee. It was about Geraldine Rubia. Going to the film festival and seeing films made by local women kind of gave me the confidence and also the awareness that it was possible to live in your hometown, to tell our own stories.
People had to find their pathways. People like Barbara Dorn went and did a lot of work in Montreal, came back, making films the whole time, 40 years of making films. I see her in some ways as like the godmother of the community, just absolutely persistent about securing the means to do it on whatever threadbare framework she had. We were just thinking, if there's a woman out there in Canada and eventually the world who's making anything, I've got a festival for you. Start talking about our submission date for the current year's festival. I remember having a couple of conversations with some filmmakers women in town who said, you know, you're really not doing enough to fill the gaps that are really blatant here in our knowledge base. Since you've already got this dedicated time for exhibition of film, why not expand it? And I took that to heart. I took that both as a kind of grievance, but as a challenge.
Having people like Christine Vachon sit at the LSBU Hall and being interviewed by Noreen Gulfman and just talk about the art of filmmaking and just to have that access to people like her.
I was invited back this year to sit on a panel about show running called Calling the Shot. So it was an opportunity to talk about what it takes to run the show in television. The Women's Film Festival was really influential on me, and I think it is on most people who begin their careers here, because it's the place to get your work highlighted, to, you know, meet other people from the industry. It was the Women's Film Festival where I saw Mary Lewis's film When Ponds Freeze Over, and that was hugely influential in terms of me realizing, oh, you can create your own work here. You can make work about being from here, and it can get out there in the world.
The early days, what became our industry forum, were so well attended. So I saw in the response, not just to the films, but to those workshops, how much the actual creative community relied on that. That was really important.
There's a very welcoming environment here at the festival, and I think it's great for us filmmakers to engage and get to know each other.
Alejandro. What did I say?
When we were talking about having a director involved in the project, ideally I would like to have someone that speaks Spanish. That would be great. And I was like, but I don't think that's going to happen here in Newfoundland. And then Ruth was like, wait now, what about Tamara Segura?
Hello.
I was like, what? And she said, there's a Cuban filmmaker in St. John's, and she is amazing, so maybe we should ask her.
It was really fun because you had all the control.
Over time, I thought we really have to start encouraging women to be directors, of owning that property. We were looking for as much XX chromosome behind the camera as we could get.
Back in early 2000s, I made a short film. When I found out the film was accepted to the Women's Film Festival, I was just over the moon.
Back in 2007, I submitted it to the St. John's Women's Film Festival, and it got in.
I made my first film in 1999, and then that film, Murigama, didn't get in. So my first film was rejected by the Women's Film Festival, and that was a blow. But it was a good blow, because it made me realize that part of making film and television, it's such a humongous mainstream medium that acceptance in that is hard to get.
The Women's Film Festival, I feel like it's a film school and community all in one. So it's just this perfect combination for a filmmaker, especially an emerging filmmaker here.
We have an award dedicated annually to an emerging filmmaker. So all of those women who have made those shorts for that Michelle Jackson Emerging Filmmaker Award, you know, have almost to a person gone on to do the next level. Very, very satisfying to have the festival give that opportunity.
In 2013, I received Michelle Jackson Award as an emerging filmmaker, and that sort of opened the door for me as a filmmaker in Canada.
I have a career now in the industry, and it's kind of a broad spectrum career, and it's all around storytelling.
This is what's happening in Newfoundland. Look at all the female talent that is coming out of there, and I don't think that can be underestimated.
In garage movie that we were just gonna kind of bust out and be like, here's something we did.
The festival became like a training ground for observing what people were doing, obviously on screen, and as you know, one might imagine it, thinking, I'm going to go next level. She can do that, I can do that. That can be done, and start dreaming it.
So we had so much help along the way that made it a whole new level.
I mean, Jordan Canning, all of her films are so amazing. How many features and shorts have been at the festival that have been Jordan's, and they're all singular and wonderful. And she's a buddy. She's someone I can ask a question of, and she's always been a source of inspiration.
When we started to bring filmmakers in, if you invited them, there was no way they were declining. An opportunity to be in this place in Canada that was not just welcoming, but like staggeringly beautiful. We would get some of our volunteer staff to take them around, Cape Spear and give them the opportunity to get out of town a little bit. It didn't matter what the weather was. It could be blowing a gale, as it often was. So that became part of what we were about, too. It was also an opportunity for younger people who would stay up all night, too, to come to the festival, a way of drawing them in to watching films, and of moving from just a woman audience to a much more mixed and diverse audience. Hanging around people who really knew how to party.
No, it's a real shame that no one here knows how to have any fun at all. We have no sense of play.
Brian Johnson, who's film reviewer for Maclean's, came here for the festival, and he covered it in Maclean's, getting a national audience, and he had the time of his life. He ended up at the Ship, or he was like partying all night. He was having what the festival became, this social space of intense fun and celebration. That was a huge turning point. The year that we showed Random Passage, a novel adaptation by local filmmakers Barbara Dorn and Janice Ripley, and watching that on a screen in our own world, a big, big highlight of the festival. Likewise, Grand Seduction, opening the festival with Gordon Pinson. That was just a gorgeous night. Color and smiles and shiny clothes, and Maudie, more recently, Mary Sexton's brilliant film about Maudie Lewis. The best social, coherent, high-level intensity. Just a lot of love in the room. A lot of love for the creative process and for each other. I mean, it doesn't get better than that.
All of the love in the room.
We sure still need these festivals, and festivals that are not specifically women's film festivals need to step it up to make sure that more women's stories are in festivals.
I still think we need to strive towards telling stories that people want to see and that people can relate to as a whole.
Women filmmakers are ahead in certain regards and still fighting the exact same fights that we have been for decades.
When I went to film school, about 50% of us were female, and then coming out and working into the world, the numbers kind of went down.
Other filmmakers who make shorts or make one feature and then they're being offered big budget films like 10 million or 20 million, and those offers aren't on the table for women.
Yeah, you have to see it to be it, and that was just here. It's built into the community here. And since then, there's been the conversation about gender parity. I mean, it's not, there isn't gender parity.
They're doing this thing now, they're making 2 women direct. It's like, first of all, it takes 5 men to do one woman's job, but in the industry, they're kind of saying it would take 2 women to do a man's job. It's like, oh, bullshit. We're 52% of the population. Everybody starts somewhere.
If at the end of the film you feel the need to talk, we will be here, because there's nothing more important to me than having a dialogue about this subject matter. So, and the last thing I want to say is we made this film with so much love.
This was an incredible Indigenous story, Indigenous team, Indigenous filmmakers. As an intersectional feminist organization as well, we can look at, okay, what things have improved, but then once we even break down those accomplishments, well, where are the Indigenous women filmmakers? Where are the Black filmmakers? Where are the women of color in our industry? We have so far to go.
As an immigrant, queer, and artist of color, there are a lot of systematic obstacles. Women have gone through the same issues in society.
When I was producing Little Dog, and we had 6 of the 7 episodes that first season being directed by women. Most of the scripts were written by women, or half and half maybe. I remember seeing a picture that somebody had posted while I was directing, and it was me sitting on the floor surrounded by a sea of men. So the second season, when we got a female DP, she automatically got the B camera team, all women, and we made a little bit more effort to make sure that more of the crew were women as well.
On Little Orphans, I had a 2-year-old and I was breastfeeding a baby. So I was given that space, you know, and my husband Matthew would bring the baby to set, and both my kids, and that was really wonderful. And if anything, I think it adds kind of a nice feeling to set. It's nice to have this sort of sense of breath and play and fun. That's, you know, just as important as getting your day.
I feel like I've developed as a filmmaker as the festival has grown and become, you know, an event that filmmakers all around the world want to attend.
I know it sounds like it was a lot of work, but this was a passion project, highly successful. We were hungry to be seeing the community grow to a point where we could start counting on annually opening and closing the big nights with features by local women filmmakers, and that's where we are now. I am confident this festival is here to stay.
And you've got all of the love in the room. You've got all of the love in the room. Nobody else can tend that bloom the way that you do when you've got all of the love in the room. You gotta hearken to the backseat, baby, where they're barking out their names. They got your number. You got the rhythm of the